Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. My name is Christian D. Evans, your host. And guys, we have someone very special on because, throughout life, we're always going through hustling, making things happen. We're go-getters, we're closers, we're making things happen. And, we've heard Elon Musk going out there and making, spending 100 hours a week easily in his job. But there's also comes to a point where you have to settle down and you have to worry about yourself because, I think there's this equation in our head where you have to do this. Once I get $1 million business, then I will go and enjoy life and have more fun and do whatever. And the reality is you do have to, prioritize yourself more so than your business, because if you don't prioritize yourself, then there is no business. And so we have this guest that we're going to be talking a lot into it. He's also a church planner, but he's also a massive entrepreneur. He's got 2 master's degrees focusing on divinity and the other in church planting. He's incredible pastor and spiritual director, and my friend Elad Shapira. How are you doing today, my man?
Hey, Christian, it's great to be here today.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to it, man. But obviously, before we jump into that next kind of, what we really want to talk about right now, but kind of tell me your story, man. I mean, obviously going from a church planner, being an entrepreneur to now, being able to impact a lot of churches in that avenue. But now, obviously, something that's on your heart right now.
Yeah, so let's Quentin Tarantino this story, okay? Right now, I am a spiritual director and formation coach. And what that basically means is I help people find the direction they want to go in and then give them the tools to do it. And so that's where I am right now. So fast rewind back to a little baby. I don't think your viewers could see me, but just imagine a little baby with a giant beard like I have now. So my parents divorced at a very young age. My father checked out physically, my mother checked out emotionally. And so I really had no direction growing up. There weren't that many people who took an interest in the things I had to say or thought or felt. And so I just kind of made my way through the world. Come to find out recently, I actually have severe ADHD, and that made life so much harder because it was undiagnosed until like a couple years ago. And so I knew something was different. The other kids in school made sure I knew it, but I was smart enough that none of the adults really noticed. And so I'm going through school, doing okay in classes, not being able to focus, not being able to stop talking. But what's interesting about ADHD is it makes you really creative and it makes you want to start new things. And I think that's where my entrepreneurial spirit kind of comes from, because I see something's missing, and so I want to get it done. I want to bring in my talents. So I went to seminary. As you said, I got a master's of divinity and a master's of church planting, which is essentially entrepreneurship in the church. It's starting new churches 90% of the time from scratch. And that's where I've been for the past 5 years or so. Post-COVID, I've noticed a lot of mental health issues coming to the forefront, and for myself and for other people as well. And that has spurred me on to try and help people. So growing up, I was not Christian. I was agnostic at best. But when I did become a Christian, it seemed very clear that there was a mold. You, as a Christian, you sat down quietly, you put your hands together to pray, and you open your Bible, and you sit there quietly and just do that for a couple hours. That does not work for someone with ADHD. And so that became a real hardship, even as becoming a pastor and a church planter, where prayer and Bible reading were hard for me. And so how could I be a pastor and do that? But when I found out about my ADHD, everything kind of clicked, even before the medication kicked in. I realized it's not that I don't want to do these things. It's not that I am inherently bad at doing them. My brain literally can't do it that way. And so what ended up happening is I started learning a lot more about myself, taking all the tests I could, the Myers-Briggs, the DISC, the Enneagram, which friends character am I on Facebook, all of the tests to get to know myself. And as I did, I realized that there were certain things, to put in business terms, give me a higher ROI. And sitting quietly doesn't give me that. But going out into nature, like your background, or walking while I pray, or painting or playing music while I pray, that all is just as valid and just as heartfelt. But there doesn't seem to be that kind of representation. And so back to where we started, I'm now a spiritual director helping people try to find their direction and individualize a formation plan for them that helps them mentally, spiritually, and emotionally to grow in all those areas.
That makes perfect sense, and I appreciate the Quentin Tarantino kind of aspect behind it. But however, though, let's kind of dive into a few things, because ADHD is very important. I know right now that's kind of being a very epidemic right now with being categorized that. However, though, just like you said, and you're starting to realize, is that is an asset that majority of people do not have. And obviously you can't do things the same way that everybody else. You can't be fit in a little box, if you will. So let me ask you, who helped you get through that? And when you realized that you did have ADHD or something, or you struggle with that, I should say, did you stop and almost look down upon yourself, or was it more enlightenment, like, that makes more sense why I'm able to think the way I think? Like, I'm just curious, what was going through your head, that process?
Yeah, so I had a couple people who were mentors to me. My first pastor, we actually, the first day I started at the church was actually the first day he started at the church as well. So we were both nervous for very different reasons. And we got to know each other, and he became this friend, this father figure who I could go to for advice. I could go to for spiritual counsel. I could go to for whatever I need, and knew that he would not think less of me. He would not judge me. And he would just take in everything that I said and come back with some loving and corrective answer sometimes. And so that was very impactful for me. And I'm still in contact with him today, even though I live thousands of miles away from him now. And then as far as the enlightenment versus depression of the ADHD, it was an enlightenment. It was very much like, okay, I have something that thousands of other people also have. And so that actually happens a lot when you get a diagnosis like that, because you're going through your life and things just aren't working. And so you keep struggling and trying harder, and it just keeps eating away at like the idea that you're good at stuff. It basically makes you feel like, oh, I am inherently bad at what I'm doing because I'm failing at it. When really what is happening is your brain chemistry just isn't wired the way everyone else's is. And so getting that diagnosis was actually really freeing. And as I learned more about it, it was freeing that I now knew what I had, but I also had a path ahead of me that I needed to figure out. I basically had to reorient how I interact with the world. But like you said, it's an asset, especially for entrepreneurs. People seem to think that ADHD is just about getting distracted by shiny things, but really it's an inability to regulate your attention. And so there were things like I got hyper focused on, and they weren't necessarily the right thing to do at that moment, but I couldn't tear myself away from it. And so in seeking treatment and getting through that diagnosis, now that focus that all the time was out of control is now mostly under control. And I thought the medication at one point was just going to slow me down, but it didn't. It just kind of like laser focused it. So I'm still moving just as fast, but it's like the rest of my body is now keeping up.
That makes perfect sense, and I appreciate you kind of deleting that limiting belief or that misconception, because I think definitely with medication and that kind of that strategy, a lot of times we think, oh, it's going to dumb me down, but they've got so specialize in that stuff that they're able to keep that same energy, same tenacity, same whatever, but then just be able to restructure it. So my question is, now that like you said as well, it's not that you have a disease or anything. It is just a matter of, hey, this is something I have to know about myself. Like some people struggle with anxiety, some people with addictions, whatever. So it's not that it becomes your identity, but it's more of, okay, now I know it's a temptation, it's a struggle. How do I structure my life to build the right boundaries, to build the right systems, the processes, to make sure that I'm on task and I'm realizing certain red flags, or hey, this is getting me off task or whatever. So I'm curious, now that you've kind of developed that journey, what kind of systems or processes have you been able to implement in your own life to help you facilitate the most optimal you?
Yeah, I had to dumb everything down, really. Just try to break things down into the most simplest forms, to make sure that if I was doing something, I didn't have to go all around the room finding stuff, but everything I need was right in front of me. Um, you know, I created a dashboard. It has my podcast guest schedule, my social media schedule, my blog schedule, all my appointments and tasks and everything go through that, and I can see it all on one page. And so as long as I keep that in front of me, I can keep going. Um, Most days, I'll have clients, and that'll kind of break up the day into these hour chunks. But when I don't, you probably heard it go off a little bit because I forgot to silence it, but my Apple Watch goes off every hour on the hour, to just say, hey, you've been doing something for an hour. Is it time to switch? Or it's a natural break, creates a natural breaking point for me. And when I get into the deep work, the analyzing the personality tests, the coming up with the strategies, it's easy to get lost in that. And so, this reminder of, oh, time is slipping by. I need to do other things today. I need to eat. That is something I routinely forget to do, because I'm just focused on what I'm doing. I won't eat lunch. And my wife hates that. So
That's awesome. And to actually see that you're able to kind of self-reflect and analyze and obviously see, okay, what's working, what's not, and obviously, kind of reassess and push it forward. So now with the mental health, okay, because you're exactly right. I see some people, they just tap out. And whether that's business, whether it's life, and that's through tapping out through different ways, just totally everything just implodes. And definitely within the last few years, people losing jobs, losing, spouses, losing investments, losing all sorts of stuff. And they say, there's only a certain amount that you can take. And so you have to have that mental health kind of structure. So what was your story? Did you struggle with mental health? And then that's one of the reasons why it's kind of set on your heart, or you started seeing a lot of this around you and said, there's got to be something here.
yes, both. So ADHD is mental health, right? But also I've seen a lot of church planters, a lot of business owners, a lot of entrepreneurs burn the candle at both ends so much that they burn out and they never want to do it again. People who were really effective just didn't have the right boundaries, and it leads to these negative thoughts, the depression and the anxiety, and it takes your life away from you, literally and figuratively. Um, Something like 72% of entrepreneurs are experiencing some sort of mental health burnout. And that's as of February this year. And I'm pretty sure COVID had a lot to do with that. But there's this underlying narrative that entrepreneurs always have it together. They're always just on the verge of that next big deal that's going to be the $1 million solution. If you ever talk to an entrepreneur, nothing bad is ever happening. Their life is literally that Facebook feed of like all my best moments, the highlight reel. And it's just not true. We can kid ourselves, but it isn't. And if we live by numbers, if we live by our performance, eventually we're going to have a day where we're not at peak performance and the numbers aren't where we want them to. And if that's the center of our life, that's when things go wrong. And suddenly we're depressed and anxious. And in some cases, very sadly, these problems build up and some people even take their own life about it. And that's horrible. No one should feel that way.
And let's talk about this because see, sometimes I think definitely entrepreneurs and business people or just people in general, right? You don't know what you don't know. And so sometimes you're living your life at this high level. Maybe I think there are some red flags that are hitting you in the face, but you ignore them because, well, I've always, I'm always mad or frustrated. That's just who I am. And the reality, no, that's a red flag, right? Or maybe there's another red flag of, hey, you're being depressed or anxious, or you just fly off the wheel all of a sudden. Like there's certain red flags. And so I guess I want to kind of dive into this for those that are listening and maybe they're struggling with this. Maybe they don't even know it. What are some red flags that they should be aware of? Like there are certain things that, hey, if you're doing this and this and this, maybe you need to have this conversation with someone.
Absolutely. So personally, one of the things, my red flags, is I will get frustrated at the drop of a hat, like 0 to 100 over something really, really stupid, because it's not really about that. And on my worst days, my wife is the one who gets to handle that, which is awful. And she is an amazing woman. Thankfully, she chose to marry me. But so frustration, a lack of interest or motivation to do things, sleeping more or too little, eating too much or too little. So these are the main signs of depression and anxiety. I would also challenge any of the entrepreneurs listening to what's the last thing they did with their kids or with their spouse. Because if they can't come up with an answer like that, something's wrong, something's out of order, something's a priority has been accidentally dropped. And so we need to have those boundaries, even when things are going badly, to be able to disconnect and still enjoy life when one part of it may not be that joyful.
Wow, that's really, really good advice. And just like red flags, just being aware of. And that's a really good question. Um, in regards to that, because see, I know like the entrepreneur, because I struggle with this as well, is this misconception. It's almost like, okay, I gotta be hustling because that's just the narrative. I gotta be moving, I gotta be pushing. But to what cost, right? The cost of your physical, you gain 50 pounds all of a sudden, your health, you're not sleeping, right? So to what cost? And that's the question. And then, like you said, in order to identify, okay, is this a problem? Is ask yourself, when's the last time you've hung out with your kids? When's the last time you hung out with your wife? And then you go, oh wait, when was the last date night? Oh, that was 7 months ago. Maybe there's something there, right? So now that you've kind of asked those questions, let's talk a little bit further in regards to putting in the right boundaries and putting their systems and processes. So now you've identified the problem. Now, what are some processes and systems that you recommend?
Yeah, so I'm going to start by saying this, and this is a very touchy subject, especially with entrepreneurs. I probably won't get asked on any more podcasts after this. But the business is not the center of your life. It just isn't. It's not your identity. It's not who you are. It is a tool that you are sharpening as you build it to be able to live out your purpose. And so whatever that purpose is, I would challenge any entrepreneur that says I'm just in it for the money, because I don't think that sustains anyone. But so what is the purpose? And when you figure out that purpose, things start to fall in line. If the purpose is you are trying to get more freedom to spend with your family, then you're chasing something that you could have right now. And so boundaries are the key thing, right? When you are with your wife, turn off, or your spouse or your kids, turn off the cell phone. There's no reason to do business on a Saturday if other things are going on. And some things, have to be taken care of. Some things, there may not be anything going on. And so you want to do a little work. That's fine. But you don't want to be working 24/7 to have your kids come up to you and just say, I'm sorry, I can't, I have to do this other thing rather than spend time with you, because that will mess up your kids. That will communicate to your wife that she is not as important as the business. And I don't think any entrepreneur would say that or even believe that, but our actions are subconsciously motivated. And so subconsciously, we're putting the business first when we really want to be putting our family first.
Yes, you're exactly right, and I was guilty of this numerous times. It's that whole equation. I once I produce X result in business, then I will spend more time with my wife, or spend more time with my kids, or spend more time with XYZ, right? And what I found so interesting, what you're saying here, is that there is this. I see a lot of business owners, they struggle with this. Hey, if I'm working, I feel guilty for not spending more time with my family, and when I'm with my family, I feel guilty for not spending time with my at work. And we have to be just okay with the constraints that we put in. And so something I've learned, and one of my good business leaders I talk to, he's like, start developing your life into building constraints, because what happens when you build constraints in your life, then what happens is you start putting a solution and start, okay, you know what, if I want to spend 10 hours or 20 hours or 30 hours with my wife more so than my business, well, I'm able to do that. Then you start focusing on higher leverage activities in your business, and you start delegating other responsibilities. You're finding, so what happens, you start building your lifestyle, right? And you ask yourself, what kind of lifestyle do you want to live? And then you start building that kind of lifestyle, instead of saying, okay, my business runs me and my business is in control of me, which is not a healthy situation at all. And I love to get your response. When you're working with some of your clients, is that tough for them? And what's that journey like for some of them? Are they very adaptive and like, okay, you know what, I'm just in pain. I'm in this dark valley. I need help now. Or is it like, hey, it's a process?
Hopefully, we start talking before we get to the deep darkness. That would be ideal, I think, for anyone. But I talk to people at every stage. And the one thing I do with all my clients, no matter who they are, is I help them to create a rule of life. And what that is, it comes from the church world. Monks, specifically Benedictine monks, would have rules of life, things that they abided by, they invested in, how they lived their life. It was the rule of their life. And so what that kind of looks like now is, I particularly once a year, usually in January, decide, okay, what are the things that I want to do daily? What are the things that I want to do weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly? And then I stick to that. If I say I want to have a date night with my wife once a month, and it comes to be the 31st of the month and I haven't done it, I know I need to. It gives me some accountability. And that's really what I think entrepreneurs need, right? They need accountability because entrepreneurs can do whatever they want. That's the point, right? They can, and so they are. Um, but sometimes when our priorities get out of whack, we need someone to hold us accountable, hold our feet to the fire, and say, "Look, man, you said you were going to take your kids out this weekend, and you're at work. That's not right. Something's out of whack here." Um, and so, yeah, so we sit down and just start to figure out what practices, whether you are Christian or not, what practices do you want to have be a part of your life? Is it prayer? Is it mindfulness? Is it meditation, journaling, uh, you know, date night with the wife, time out with the kids, time with friends, which we're really bad at, keeping up with friends. Um, and just all these things that are just as important to us as our business, but often we don't think about and are intentional about having those be a part of our life as well.
Yeah, let's kind of talk a little bit about this. So, like, what because I know a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs, right? Is that shiny object syndrome? We all struggle with this, right? We want to start implementing all these strategies, whatever. And what I've noticed is that if you don't focus on one strategy and implement that one strategy, then you'll never stay consistent with it long term. And that's really the ultimate goal is staying consistent long term, right? A lot of our audience, they're mid six figure, high six figure entrepreneurs, and they do very well for themselves, but they want to scale to the next level. But in order to do that, you have to have, like you said, delegation. And so one of the things I've learned, and just I work with my clients a lot of times, is like, okay, hey, when you have a problem, like if you're on Saturday night and you actually have a date night with your wife, and all of a sudden you have to respond to a client, respond to an email, you have to ask yourself, first of all, okay, how do I make sure that this does not happen again? And you have to build a system and a process around that, delegating, giving a virtual assistant, having, hiring another person, whatever it is, because then you say that's a red alert, it's a red flag. Now, in order to do that, you have to stop yourself and say, okay, you know what? I don't want that to happen again. But like I was just basically coming back to around this. Let's say we implement one strategy. What would be that one strategy that you would recommend, like a lot of people should focus on? Maybe, okay, you know what? I'm going to stay consistent and intentional and disciplined, spending time with my kids with my phone down, like, or something. What would be a good strategy to start with? Like, there's so many different ways, but what would you say?
I'm a simple man. So I'm an iPhone user. I know a lot of people are, and I'm sure Android has something similar now. But there's a do not disturb mode on your phones, and you can actually set it up to automatically go on and off, so you don't even have to think about it. But turning that on so that the distractions really are silenced. And you can even set up an away message that says, "Hey, I'm with my kids. I'll get back to you when I can." Because no one's going to look at you and say, "Oh, you're spending time with your kids. You're a horrible business owner." Um, and if they do, maybe that's not the kind of client you want. Um, so yeah, so just and it's probably also the hardest thing for entrepreneurs to do, right? To put down the phone. But if you can set it up so that like when you walk in the door at 6 p.m. or 8 p.m., as most entrepreneurs, 10 p.m., 11 p.m. with entrepreneurs, uh, it just automatically happens. You don't even have to think about it. That's what I've learned in kind of trying to work with my ADHD is I want to automate as much of my life as possible because my brain isn't going to do it. My brain can't hold all that information. And so the more information I get out of my brain and automate, the less I have to worry about. And it frees me up for more creativity, more time with my family, more time with my friends. And there's a thing called a pastor's story. And what they are stories that may or may not be true, but they tell the purpose of the sermon real nice. And so pastors love to tell them. But I don't know if this is true or not, but one I heard was there was a man who every day after work, he would touch the tree in front of his house before he walks in. And his neighbor sees him doing this day after day, month after month, year after year. Finally, curious enough, hey, what are you doing? Why do you touch the tree before you go in? And the guy says, I'm hanging up all my work problems because I'm not going to bring them into the house to deal with them. And I'll pick them up tomorrow morning when I leave. But for now, they're just going to hang here.
That is a very powerful analogy. I love that story. Very powerful. What I've come down to is there's like two different types of people in today's world. There's excuse makers and there's solution seekers, right? And you can justify, and it's very interesting. We all do it, right? We justify, oh, well, I'm not where I'm at because of X, Y, Z, right? Fill in the blank. And then what I found very interesting though is solution seekers are the ones that really live their optimal lifestyle, right? And what I love about your story is that you could have said, oh, I'm never going to be successful because I have ADHD. Right. And you could have had that identity and pulled that together. But in reality, you said, no, I'm going to figure out and I'm going to put a solution seeker. I'm going to find a way to, leverage, just like you were saying, and finding systems and processes. I think that's why it's so powerful. Now, also, I want to mention this because I think some of our listeners, probably very similar to a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners, they're like, mental health, that's for losers, right? That's for losers, man. I don't have no mental health. I don't have no mental issues or whatever, man. Whatever. That's some stupid crap. However, though, those individuals that tend to bring that up, I think, tend to maybe have that even more so. So what is your perspective on that? You're on mute, bud.
I am on mute. I apologize. I said the most profound thing. I don't know if you heard it or not.
I love it.
Solution seekers, people who try to leverage their current situation, it's not necessarily that they're living the optimal life, but their optimal life is different than the other people. So the world tells us we need to work harder, make more money, and buy a Ferrari or a Porsche or whatever. I'm lucky enough to see one on the street driving by, frankly. But that goal is just so empty at the end of the day because money's not going to comfort you. Money's not going to console you. It may be able to make certain problems go away, but it brings 20 more. And so we can see our current situation as, oh, woe is me, always looking in the future. I'm going to make it better. I'm continuously making it better. But frankly, right now isn't terrible, right? Like your situation that you are in has some bad things, 100% true. But there are also good things going on right now. And that's something I had to realize as well with struggling with the depression and the ADHD and how do I turn this into a solution? And it's things like automated systems. I make sure my phone reminds me to check in with my mood throughout the day at several times. It reminds me to breathe. It reminds me to take times. It reminds me to have gratitude. We hear about these gratitude journals. And while I don't keep a journal, but when my phone goes off, I know, okay, what am I thankful for right now? What is good right now around me? Because like you said, if our mindset is on all the deficits, we're just going to continue to get more deficits. But if we start to focus on assets, if we start to focus on the good things, we can multiply those and multiply it for others as well.
Yeah, and let's kind of dive into this. So, like for those that struggle with the concept of mental health, right? Some people just they don't care about it. It's for losers. What is your perspective in that regard? And how to kind of maybe bring some clarity to those people that maybe don't see value in being aware of this and having a little bit of empathy around those that do.
Well, my first response is no, you're the loser. So we're seeing it more and more. We all, I would say, with almost without a doubt, have someone who is struggling with depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder or whatever they're dealing with. And whether or not you are dealing with it, you don't want to deal with it, right? You want to head it off before you have to start dealing with it. Um, it may seem, oh, I just get a little sad here now and then. I get a little angry now and then. Everyone gets angry. Doesn't everyone punch a hole in the wall when they're angry? But the things we experience, we normalize. So your childhood is just normal until you start interacting with other people's families, right? The toxicity, the whatever was going on, the depression, the anxiety, all feels normal and kind of becomes that background radiation, the air conditioner hum that you often tune out. And then it's not until we actually bump up against someone who is in a similar situation or just in our life that seems to have a different outlook, and we start to analyze that and we realize, oh, my life, that's not normal. This toxicity isn't normal. I used to think I had a pretty great childhood, but then I started hanging out with my wife's family, and just the more I hang out with them, you can see this like trajectory of like, oh, my childhood sucked. And yeah, I'm sad about that, and I could be sad about that, but now I have family. And from a very Christian perspective, God provided that for me, right? If you're Christian, there is a belief that God will provide for you. And so I can't speak about any other faiths. That's because I don't know that much about them. I can only speak about mine. And so if you believe that God is in control and God is going to provide, and incidentally, when we talk about taking a Sabbath, that's actually what we're reminding ourselves. We can take a day off and the world doesn't burn around us. We're not in control, God is. And so it shifts how you act, because you're no longer an owner, a manager, entrepreneur. Now you're a steward, and you're taking these things that you have been given, and your choices are just now, how do I use them to bless others, to help others, to grow in my walk, to grow in my faith. And so it's
Yeah, I think you said some really powerful things, because even when you were saying, like, everybody, everybody gets mad, everybody does this, right? It's a very simple, easy justification if we're not aware of it, and oh, this is normal if we do this or whatever, and sometimes you have to sit back and say, well, but you don't, you don't want to live that lifestyle. You want to live. You have to ask yourself, what kind of lifestyle do you want? What kind of result do you want? And then surround yourself to do that and accomplish that. Do you want to sacrifice 100, 200 hours to achieve X result? Well, not really, because at the end of the day, and what I always find very interesting as well, maybe we could talk about this, is the sacrifices, right? You may not be a Jeff Bezos, but you know what? You're going to be a multimillionaire, and then as well as be a good dad. Right. And the thing is, you have to acknowledge the right expectations as well. You're not going to be the best, fantastic dad. You may miss some soccer practice because of the job and so forth. And that's okay. But then also back over here, you may be a really amazing and hit everyone, but you may not be the best at business, whatever. So just having those right expectations and the clarity, I think, just is very powerful. I'd love to for your response on that as well.
Yeah, I kind of joked about this earlier about how if you tell a client that you are going to spend time with your kids, they're not going to get mad at you. And if they do, don't have that client. But really, in a service-based, client-oriented business, I would hope that as an entrepreneur, you're building relationships with these people, right? You're building relationships with these clients. You're getting to know them. You're getting to know their kids' names. You're getting to share about your kids with them. And because clients don't join a business or hire someone based on what that business is or their logo, it's based on a relationship. And what ends up happening is if we as entrepreneurs can begin to have good boundaries and live a life that, you're right, I'm never going to be Jeff Bezos, but I am going to be an amazing father, an amazing husband, and at least for me, an okay business owner. I hope your listeners are a little better than me, but and then you get the opportunity to help your clients do that too, because guaranteed they're also struggling with these same things. And when they see you with your proper boundaries, they'll begin to question as well. And so they'll ask you, why do you put your hand on the tree? Why do you clock out at 6 p.m. every day? And yet you still seem to be doing fine. I have to work till midnight just to scrape by. And chances are it's just that your goals and priorities are a little out of skew or beyond you for right now, and you need a smaller one. It's tiny incremental steps, right? You'd mentioned that, taking on a lot of things at once, you're not going to be able to sustain them all. So the question then becomes is, what is one thing you can do to prioritize the rest of your life right now alongside your business?
100%. 100%. I love it, man. I love it. So let's kind of pivot a little bit toward, obviously church planning. With this kind of this ability that you see with mental health and so forth, let's talk a little bit about pastors, because we've been talking a lot about business owners and entrepreneurs, but also, pastors. We've seen the divorce rate is pretty bad. Honestly, we've seen individuals that struggle because they're going all in with the church. And don't get me wrong, it's a very interesting concept a little bit, and I like to talk about this because I think there's certain limiting beliefs that are destructive, I should say, because it is God ordained, and you may be called to do that, yes, but not to the cost of your relationships. And I'd like to get your response, because that's a tough conversation to have with pastors, because even though they are very godly, sometimes they're the most non-humble people in the world, and they're hard to reach sometimes. And I'd love to have your response on that.
Absolutely. Here's a fun fact. Most pastors are introverts and people pleasers. That is just the
100%. Yep.
generic mock-up of a pastor. It's me too, except I'm an extrovert, but I'm also a people pleaser. And when I first started, I was working those 80-hour weeks because it's a good mission. We're trying to get the church up and going. God, I'm working for the kingdom of God, baby. This is awesome. And 80 hours now means 30 hours next week. But I think when a pastor gets into that situation, just like entrepreneurs, they've flipped the roles that they're called to. As a Christian, as a pastor, you are first and foremost called to be a Christian, a Christ follower. Second, if you're a husband, a father, your relationships, you're responsible for the relationships you have in your life. And then, in my opinion, and then and only then does your work come in. Because if you work so hard that you get divorced and you lose your marriage and your kids, it's just as displeasing to God as being lazy and not using your gifts to help people. Those are equal in God's eyes.
Yeah, and sadly, we see that, and that's why I wanted to kind of hit that head on a little bit, because I do think there are certain destructive patterns as well as destructive beliefs that are in the church that obviously, specifically that pastors have to work on. One of the things I really want to emphasize a little bit, and maybe you can kind of speak on this as well, is delegation. I always love to talk about this because, see, first of all, you have to come into delegating, whether it may be an administrative task. You have to think about even larger things where, you can delegate as a CEO of your company, right? You have a CEO, and because that's what a lot of people have done. Bill Gates, for example, now he's over here doing something else, and a CEO, he pays him, $5-10 million. But my point is delegating, right? Delegating is a very powerful tool because, you find the who that knows how to do XYZ, whatever it may be: marketing, sales, systems, processes, bookkeeping, CPA, whatever. But the thing is in order to do that, it helps your mental health, right? And like I was saying, there's red flags. First, you have to identify that you do have maybe some things that you have to work on internally, but then you have to build processes and systems. And so I like to talk about strategically, even like pastors, right? You should not be, at a certain point, maybe at the beginning, but at a certain point, when you have 1,000, 500 congregation, you should not be picking out the music of the weekend. You should have someone else do that, right? It's a delegating responsibility. So I love to, ask kind of what that looks like on each stage, and obviously delegating responsibility.
Yeah, so I'll talk about pastors and then I'll bring it more generalized. So interestingly, for pastors, whereas other occupations, you might only need 2 or 3 competencies to be really good at what you do. There was a survey a while back that said pastors need like 60. Just all the hats that they wear, they have to be a jack of all trades, and you end up being a master of none. And that's definitely me. When I was doing the trip, like, I got good at graphic design. I got good at social media. Or I got okay at social media. I got, I had to figure out how to do these things because the people I was with at that time didn't necessarily understand this to the same level that I did. And what that was mistrust, ultimately. The reason we don't delegate is because we don't trust anyone to, 1, care like we do, or 2, do it to the level we want it to be. And it got to the point where I was talking with my mentor, and he's like, you know what I used to do? Whenever someone says, hey, this is something we should be doing in the church, he would go, that's a great idea. Would you like to start that and get a team around that? And that's the way to do it, right? The boundaries is, you want to do this. It is not necessarily my responsibility to take on your burden of wanting to do this. And to flip that around also, you can't do it all yourself. You have to trust people and give them the room to move into that role. So you can't let someone do something and then see they're doing it not the way you want to do, and then take it back, because that just disempowers them completely. But to delegate and to understand, at first, it may not be to the same quality that you want it to be, but that's what mentoring is about, right? Especially if you're just starting out, the question is, it's going to take me 5 minutes to do this, and it's going to take me 30 to teach someone to do it. What does that time investment look like? And so I would say it's one of those things. 30 minutes now will save you 30 minutes every week for the rest of your life. And so we got to trust people, and we got to let them come into themselves in these positions as well. And so as an entrepreneur, as anyone who has any sort of responsibility that's in charge of anything, I want to tell you a secret. You're going to die. None of us get out of this alive. And eventually, the question me and my wife watch Shark Tank a lot because we love that kind of stuff. And Mr. Wonderful always asks, what if you get hit by a bus tomorrow? What happens? What happens to my money once you get hit by that bus? But his point is there anyone to succeed you? Who are you mentoring? Who are you bringing your legacy to that it may continue past you. And I think that's an important part of running a business, is that delegation for legacy.
Yeah, you're exactly right, because we talk a lot about this on our podcast, is success versus significance. Success is, hey, look at me, I'm on the top of the mountain, right? Whether it's an entrepreneur or whether it's a pastor or whatever. And significance is, okay, how many people can I bring to the top of the mountain with me, right? And obviously that's kind of where you're at, is you're very good at, church planning, which is really awesome. I mean, being able to, leverage that skill. Boom, I can help you church plant. And then obviously when you get, 500, 700 people in it, now I go to the next person, right? And help them. But also kind of coming back to what you're saying, which I think is very, very, very important, is, it's that misconception of, okay, hey, if I spend 30 hours, it takes me 30 hours on the front end to teach this task. A really good tip is make sure you record yourself doing that. So then guess what? Now all of a sudden it's duplicatable. Boom, you hire someone, that person leaves, you hire someone new. Now all of a sudden you already had it all pre-recorded, and boom, that person can take off because you've already got it all dialed in. Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, and I think more to the point, I think any enterprise, whether it's a church, a business, what an organization of any kind, has a life cycle, and each of those life cycles, those stages, different gifts, different talents, different competencies are needed, and we need to be understand. We need to understand ourselves well enough to know I don't have all the skills and competencies that I need. I may be the one who can start this, but I might not be able to sustain this. Like, that is just not my skill set. So I need to find someone who is better at sustaining business than starting business. And hopefully by doing this, you kind of get this bell curve where you get to the top. And as long as you're uh, finding the right people to do the right things, you're not going to tip. You're not going to go down towards that death, because you're constantly trying to make sure that you're healthy, that your organization is healthy. And so I think it's really important. The biggest thing entrepreneurs, I think, need is to understand who they are before they start a business, before they do anything like this, any endeavor. You got to count the cost. You got to understand who you are, because before the Adderall, I was a vision man. I was an idea man. Don't ask me how to do it, but I can see a vision of, like, this is what I want. But I needed someone who could execute. And so if you're an idea man or woman, you need someone who can execute. If you're an executor, you need someone who can put your skills to use. And I think the solo entrepreneur model is really unsustainable. I think more sustainable, though more equity is kind of needed, is the team model, right? You started up with a group of people that are excellent at their one thing and their piece of the pie, and you there?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I apologize. It stopped there, but yes, you're exactly right, and I think that's so valuable in what you just mentioned in regarding finding the right people, putting them on the right bus, and then you just take off, and then you also give them the opportunity to take ownership and give them the blessing to really optimize at that higher level, and everybody lives at that higher level, which is awesome. So I really appreciate us diving into this, some good stuff. I mean, going from mental health to building the strategies and certain action steps. Very very realistic action steps that people can be aware of, but also being aware of their red flags, right? For those that, like, hey, I don't need mental health, or those that are like, maybe I need to, kind of be aware of my patterns, my habits, my process, the way I think, which is really valuable. So I really appreciate us dialing into this. Now, if they want to reach out to you, whether it's coaching or anything like that, how do they reach out to you, my man?
Yeah. So my website is prodigal, prodigal sd.org. And my name, ELAD, at prodigalsd.org is my email. And I want to offer you or anyone else who's listening to this podcast right now I'm going to give a free consultation and free session. Just mention your podcast and they can get that.
Wow, that's awesome. I really appreciate that's a lot of value, guys. And honestly, when you're listening to this, I would highly recommend reaching out to him. Those links will be in the description below. Make sure you reach out to him. Make sure you click on it. Make sure you obviously take him up on this offer. That's a beautiful offer. And then as well as before we let you go, is there any last words that you would like to share with our audience, my man?
Yeah, you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to do it alone. There are people out there who can support you, and take care of yourself, not just your business.
Amen to that. Amen. Foot stomp on that. Awesome. Elad Shapira, guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Make sure you reach out to him. And again, remember, be uncommon. Cheers.